All right, time is 6:30, October 24th, Abington Conservation Commission meeting. I'm gonna switch around the agenda a little bit. I just want to touch on all the ongoing enforcement orders real quick, because I gotta leave at 8 o'clock, so I want to make sure everyone knows what's going on with each one. So, discussion on letter received from DEP regarding 267 North Quincy Street. I'm gonna meet with the town manager tomorrow to figure out the course of action going forward with that, as far as getting, if we have to get a lawyer involved, how we're gonna do that to get on the property. So we still haven't heard back from the property owner yet. Enforcement order for 95 Niles. I wanna set up a site walk for next week. So I guess it would just be everybody except for
Me?
Jean. What
what?
day works best for
95
everybody?
Niles Street, next week sidewalk.
What day?
What-
Not Halloween.
Yeah, not Halloween. Well, I don't know what they give out for candy, so maybe.
I don't think they're home.
I'm working nights, so any day works for me.
Okay.
Okay.
I
I'm,
know you're a lunchtime.
yeah, I'm a lunchtime.
What about you, Alex?
I'm out Wednesday for sure.
So-
I don't know about the rest.
All right, so reach out to them and see any 12, between 12 and 1 o'clock any day next week, except for Halloween. Next up, 154 Brockton Ave, restoration and fencing. I know the fencing has been put up. It looked like the restoration was, I don't know if it's completed or if it's ongoing.
The restoration has been completed as far as I know. Ken Johnson?
I drove by and I just drove by. I didn't stop or anything. I saw Ken out there seeding.
Yeah. Yep.
I just kept going.
The shrubs, the trees, the seed mix has been put down, the chain link fencing from the back to the front that ties into the fencing along the parking area has been completed, and I believe Lynn followed up with him on dabbing on the
Yeah,
herbicide
I
to.
saw those emails.
Yep, so, if anyone would like to pop in and take a look at it, they can. So now let's hope and pray it all grows.
Are we waiting for a report from Ken now, or
I will reach out to him and ask him for a report.
then we just basically play the waiting game for the next 2 years, right?
Yep,
All right, next, complaint course of action, update Hanson Tree. I talked to Brian Conley, delineation is gonna take place middle of next week. They've been cleaning up some of the piles still, that's ongoing, just to get it easier for the wetland scientists to get out there and do the delineation. Once that's done, they'll send the information over to us and then come before us with a plan.
okay.
And complaint course of action, update dependable tree. Lynn, I'll let you.
Yeah, so I talked, they've hired someone, Brian Donahoe, who emailed us, and I had a phone call with him yesterday. He's gonna do the delineation in the next week and a half, and is gonna come before us at the next meeting to go over it. He knows that property really well, so apparently he's been dealing with the owner for 30 years, he was a previous owner. He was telling me about how there's a perennial stream there, that stream that a lot of us saw.
Yeah.
And because it goes from the Great Weymouth Pond watershed area and it drains out to the Taunton River. But he said they're definitely working on the buffer zone. He can't get a surveyor out in time because they need to do the winter delineation by the 15th of November. But he figured he would just go with what he had for the survey and then delineate around there. And he just had questions. He wanted to know if should an NOI be filed, and I said no. This is just restoration at this point. So that was pretty much it.
All right. Building permit site visits, we talked about the site visits. No building permits, I have one I have to take a look at. Correspondence, we got a complaint for potential wetlands violation at the end of Linwood Street on the Mill Street side, so Tony's gonna send out a letter on Thursday about getting out there. I'm gonna take a ride by tomorrow.
What's the number?
From the street. I'm not sure what the number is. So, we'll set something up next week, hopefully to get out there and take a look at that.
Okay.
I think that's it for correspondence, right? All right. Well, next up, SE 084-563, notice of intent located at 0 Summer Street.
Good evening. For the record, excuse me, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Associates here with the applicant, Mr. Mark Seck from WP East Acquisitions. Happy to appear in front of the commission again this evening. The last time we were with you was a few weeks ago, where we had responded to one of the commission's initial requests for us to. Yes, I'm sorry.
Phil, could you move the board a little bit in case, Ellen, you want to take a look?
I did want to see it.
Sure, we'll put it wherever you'd like.
I know you have it on camera, but
You can stand up here with me if you'd like. All right, it's lonely. When we were last in front of the commission a few weeks ago, we had provided some discussion relative to similar examples of projects that were constructed in reasonable proximity to wetland resource areas, primarily buffer zones. And those examples included areas of steep slope, areas of stormwater basins, areas of parking. We did our best to cull those examples out to show you work that we have both done and can represent with great detail, to the best of our ability to make them as compatible to this project as possible, of course recognizing they're not equal. It was the apples and oranges discussion that we talked a couple of meetings ago about. We had also gone through some of the last lower hanging fruit to the original BSC letter to make sure we have adequate coverage at the request of the commission for erosion control, site inspection, SWIP reporting, things like that. So I would consider those matters closed, of course, unless the commission has any follow-up questions. So in the interim, since our last visit to today, we were awaiting two pieces of information. One is from your first BSC consultant, which is a letter dated October 5, which is a follow-up to our response letter discussing the buffer zone in greater detail. And at the commission's pleasure, we can, of course, walk through that letter, discuss all of the elements that are within it. We have not provided a written response to it, anticipating that we would be here tonight in front of the commission, and we should really talk about what those comments really mean and what we do with them in terms of moving forward. The other piece of it is a second letter from BSC Group, which is relative to the perfunctory stormwater peer review of the information that was contained within the ZBA application that the commission requested be completed. To our understanding, we don't have any information. I don't think your clerk has received anything. So we're still in a bit of a holding pattern with that, and would really like to talk with the commission tonight about sort of the overarching timeline associated with that. Because obviously without that critical element, we may reach a standstill, and would love to break through that as quickly as we can. So that's my introduction for this evening, and we're happy to take it in the direction the commission would like to, and talk about the project in greater detail, and set a path forward, of course.
Matthew, do you know where we stand with the stormwater peer review?
I'm told that by Friday, that will
Okay.
be done.
Okay.
Does that track with any information you have?
So I've reached out to Dominic, his counterpart in the stormwater review, just today. I only got his voicemail, so I have no new information. So if Friday is the day, that's the latest and greatest. Obviously, our goal would be to get it in a reasonable time frame, that if we have to respond to anything, we can do so in a manner that it gets to this commission before the next meeting.
Yeah.
That's our greater goal here.
I mean, like I said, it's already been vetted through the zoning process, so hopefully, if there's anything, it's minor, and
That's what we're hoping
Yeah.
for, of course, as well, Mr. Chair, is we did go through an extensive process with the zoning board. I know the commission, as during the first couple of hearings, had made mention of concerns to the process. We understand, we acknowledge those, they are what they are. But we did have a very, very detailed peer review done by Tetra Tech, another professional engineer who can certainly step in the shoes of BSC as being equal as professional engineers. So we're hoping it's very straightforward as well.
Anything else on the stormwater? I think there's really anything else to talk about anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see BSC stormwater analysis of what was presented, but with regards to the last meeting, I did zoom in on that one where you provided some examples. And,
So we're gonna jump to that now?
oh, I don't know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe we could, I would personally like to hear Matt speak first, and we can walk through
Yeah, I think we
everything.
should, like we
Oh,
did the
wait.
last
Okay,
time.
yep.
Sure, thanks. Matt Byrne, senior ecologist with BSC Group, serving as peer review consultant for the board. So I appreciate the applicant's efforts to come up with some examples of projects that are comparable in some way, because that is helpful to see former work and things that have been in operation for a period of time. My primary observation and concern, and that was the first comment in the second letter I provided on the 5th, is that the examples provided did appear to demonstrate at least a 25-foot setback from all wetlands, mostly a 50-foot. And so, that's something that it's hard to understand the constraints of the site. And the needs of the project. Looking for a setback of at least 25 feet, better if better for more, is something that I think the board should continue to try to push for. And I think those examples that were provided demonstrate that that's typical practice. So I think discussing that point is probably on order. Other than that, from what I could tell, quality work and I understand from Jean that they're through discussions with conservation commissions in the towns that those examples came from, that there were some concerns. I'm not directly privy to that, so I wouldn't want to speak to it.
Yeah. I zoomed in on that meeting, and I really couldn't hear a lot of the conversation that was going on due to the sound system and the way it's set up in this room. And unfortunately, I did not hear probably anything you had to say. No, and it's just bad when you try to zoom in. But I did reach out to all three of the towns that you gave examples for. I reached out to Rentham and Middleborough. I did not hear back from Franklin.
Okay.
With the Rentham project, it was 50 feet away from most of the areas. Middleborough had some issues with your stormwater. There were a couple, they said all I had to do was mention, I have it written down, drainage area number 15 is notorious, she said. And then there was another issue with a drainage area where there was siltation that actually went into a stream, and it took over a year for it to be resolved. Those were long-term effects that she, I think I spoke to Patricia Cassidy in
Yes.
Middleborough. And she said it was the communication trying to get these areas rectified that provided a lot of aggravation to them. Again, Rentham gave me a summary and said pretty much that, their resource areas weren't really impacted because you stayed 50 feet away. So,
So the Middleborough one, is that more of a constructability issue, or is that a design issue, though?
I don't know.
It's two
I-
separate.
She didn't really say. All she said was that drainage area 15 was not adequate.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm just repeating the notes that I took when I spoke with them.
Understood. I would add a little bit of color for you, you obviously had a direct conversation, and I
Yeah.
wasn't privy to it. There's an extensive history on that project. It's quite a large project in the town.
Yeah, she said it started in 1989, and you're in phase 7-1, 7-2.
Two,
So, I
yes.
mean, she said,
Yes.
she was going over the history.
Yes, so there is an extensive history, which I will not recap tonight for you. To Mr. Chair's point, the element that she is referring to was during construction. There was an incident where a stormwater basin was not fully constructed, and there was a downstream discharge of sediment, and it was something that ultimately had to be resolved. And then it led into some other discussions regarding providing additional drainage mitigation, which I'm happy to provide any or all of the details to supplement your conversation to the extent the commission would like that information. But there is a lengthy history there that I don't know how
Right.
much she went into with you.
I mean, we
Yes.
talked about the
Yes.
area being developed, and she said it's like 200 acres, which is, I said, the project we're talking about is confined in a very tight space.
Yes.
I made her aware of the fact that it was the Taunton River, the beginning of the Taunton River watershed.
Mm-hmm.
I said, in that general area, we have an extensive network of wetlands, and we also have them run right beside, across the street, they run right next to where our water supplies is on the Myers Street wells. So I'm sure all those wetlands filter through and, recharge the underground aquifers where we draw our water from. So, stormwater to me, I mean, where it's going to be so tight on that property and it's an issue for me. And one of the biggest issues for me is taking away 80% of a buffer area. That's a big issue for me. In no other project have I seen 80% taken away of a buffer. Anybody else?
No, I haven't seen anything that takes 80% of the buffer.
Yeah.
So-
And this project, I mean, what you do upland, that's one thing, but as you get into the buffer, I mean, once a buffer's gone, the condition of the resource area around it, I mean, I can't find projects that came that close and that it hasn't impacted it negatively. Science has shown that the buffers are there for a reason. And to be 80% built on,
Sure. So I think what I would add to the conversation, certainly understanding the concerns about the buffer zone. Your consultant raised some of the scientific discussions regarding buffer zone. And we're not going to necessarily argue the science. I'm not a wetland scientist, of course. I am an engineer, along with Mr. Seck, who is a developer. So we're not here to argue the science. The report that was referenced by Matthew during the previous, we reviewed it as well. What we have to assert to the commission is that the Wetlands Protection Act, which this project is filed under, does not incorporate those scientific standards into design requirements. Now, your local bylaw has done so. You have additional information in your bylaw for performance zones, no-touch buffers, et cetera. But your bylaw also allows for discharge of surface drainage from residential lots within the buffer zone. So there are exemptions under your local bylaw that can be provided for. I'm not equating them to the 80%, I'm using your number. I'm not equating those activities to 80%, saying that's what the bylaw intended or not. But management of stormwater within buffer zones is quite frankly, quite common.
stormwater from a residential area doesn't have the impact that this property will have. I mean, this whole property is being developed.
Yes. A large portion of the property
Yeah.
will be
So, I
developed.
mean, what currently is there for land, especially the buffer area up near where the pond is and everything, I mean, you're 20 feet from that pond.
Yes, yes.
That's an issue for me.
Understood, understood. But what I would ask the commission to rely upon is you are being asked to make a determination relative to this project's compliance with the Wetlands Protection Act.
That is true, and it's up to
Yes.
each commission to determine what's best for them and their properties. Yes, you're right.
Yes, yes. But at the same time, the Wetlands Protection Act does not define those standards of non-buildable areas or minimum setbacks that need to be achieved. We are very sensitive to the local concerns. We're not here, as we've said throughout the entirety of these hearings, to push a project through that goes against any of the desires and intentions of any of the boards in the town, but rather to find the appropriate balancing act between the needs of the project, the size and the scale of the project,
That is-
and the affordable housing
That's a good
element.
word that you just said, balance. Like,
Yes.
this plan that you're presenting in front of us, I mean, is this just the way it's going to be, or is there any way that you can do any adjustments to it that would allow for a larger buffer between some of the areas?
So we would certainly need to talk about what that entails. So that your peer reviewer obviously brought that up as a question. You know, the suggestion to relocate certain things on the site. So whether or not the commission agrees with your consultant's review, we would ask, well, to his point, to your intentions, what would that entail? Now, before the answer comes out, I do have to say that it is not a very large site. It is a reasonably sized project on the land that we worked very hard with the zoning board to deal with the site by reducing one building entirely, by scaling back some of the parking areas and surface areas that we had on the site to the plan that's here, because that was an acceptable level of detail and density to the town of Abington. Now, I use the words town of Abington as a reminder that the Zoning Board of Appeals speaks on behalf of the town of Abington in terms of them ultimately making a determination and a decision on the application.
Yes, and unfortunately, in that negotiation, our regulations were, bylaw was,
I want to separate the two because bylaw and regulations are two different things,
Yeah.
right? The regulations are what we do with the public hearing.
Yeah.
Bylaw is town meeting approval.
that was part of the negotiation process, was our wetland bylaws were.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I'm having trouble with is there's a lot of, in the first meeting we had about this, there was a lot, seemed like the party line was you have to comply with the Wetlands Protection Act, which clearly, we're here to govern that. And people are saying the performance standards, you have to meet the performance standards. But in the regulations, the state says you need to consider things like the slope. You need to consider the intensity. How much are you going to be developing in terms of us making a decision about the buffer zone? So in terms of us making a decision about what we consider to be reasonable, we have to go based on evidence. I think that's the fairest way of doing things, and not being like, oh, we're gonna be mean to you guys, but not mean to somebody else that will let go 10 feet to up to a buffer. So my issue here is, in our judgment, we have to make a judgment. And one of the things that we had a discussion with Matt about is it's clear that scientific evidence shows that you can't go 20 to 25 feet without having a negative impact upon a wetland resource. So the question then becomes, well, how do we deal with that? And Matt said, well, you really can't, but then gave you guys the option, an out, if you will, of providing an example. But the issue is the examples you provided don't answer the question, right? One of the questions is, did you guys build really close to wetland resource and everything was fine? Because that would have made me feel like, okay, this is a project that could be done.
Right.
But you're 50 feet away, and there's a big difference. And
Exactly.
it doesn't seem like it would be, but there is a big difference scientifically and et cetera. So my issue is and we talked about apples to oranges comparison. So if the question was, do north-facing buildings have a negative impact on a wetland resource? And you gave us south-facing buildings, then I'd be like, that's not the right apples to oranges. It would be an apples to oranges comparison. Here, we're getting more quantitative. Is 20 feet sufficient, but you're giving us 50? And that's the issue that I have with making the determination. So first of all, the examples aren't really convincing me that there's not going to be a detrimental impact. That's one point. The second is we are not using our bylaws we're not using our regulations, so we're going by the state. And the state clearly says in the regulations that we can make that judgment call. And then when you go and you get certified with MACC and you read out different environmental planning things for different municipalities, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying this is not sufficient. So I wanted to see evidence that what you're going to plan to do isn't going to cause harm. And I'm not seeing the evidence for that here. So while we're discussing things like, half the property is in upland and we have no jurisdiction over that. So if you could do whatever you want with zoning, deal with that and not have to deal with us. But the part that we do have jurisdiction on, that's where we typically, when we're dealing with a homeowner, and a homeowner says, because that's what we usually get as a homeowner, they want to do something and we say, you should move this over. And they'll say, okay, we'll do that. Or they'll say, well, we can't move it over because of this. Can we do this instead?
Right.
And so I think in terms of going forward, I would like to see a difference in the plan that moves things farther away from wetland resource buffers. I'm not a designer, I'm not an engineer. It's just, that's something that I think needs to be considered in order to have me convinced and happy, and I think some of the other members of the commission to feel like, okay, we can approve this project.
Okay, so I know Mark wants to say something, but just real quick, I just want to touch on a couple of bullet points that you mentioned there. We do want to revisit the record about the plans that were provided, and our hesitation on doing so initially for exactly this, which is comparing two different things and trying to equate them together. No two sites are the same. The reason we provided the examples that we did is it incorporated specific elements into those plans that are in this plan. Steep slopes, stormwater basins, close proximity of grading, buildings, etc. Each one of them was unique and different in their own way. I have them here. But I do want to echo that we did not want to provide those for exactly that reason. So we would urge the commission, I mean, you could obviously render any opinions you want on it, but I think it's unfairly applying standards from other towns and communities to your local town and communities.
I mean,
That's one.
where are we applying standards from other towns?
Well, if I
Oh,
may.
you mean the examples that you're giving?
We provided examples, and each one had certain setbacks and distances for clearing, stormwater basins, et cetera. And if you're applying those standards from those examples as hard and fast rules to this, then I think that's problematic. But I'll leave that to you, that's entirely at your discretion.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, no, go ahead, because I'm going to change
finish.
topic, but you go ahead.
I mean,
You're the commissioner.
I wasn't taking everything they said and applying it to Abington. I'm just listening to what they had to say.
Understood, that's fine. The other point, I guess, if we can, sorry, Mark, before you jump in, is...
I'm sorry, Mark, what's your last name, Mark?
Seck, S-E-C-K.
Thank you.
Yes. I wanted to see if we could get very granular to the plan as to the areas of greatest concern in terms of order of magnitude. And I understand, we have the BVW resource area here, we have the pond area here. The resource area here in the buffer zone to that, we have primarily stormwater on both sides, and the closest intrusion we have is for a wetland replication area. So if we were to start here, is the commission saying they would prefer not to have the replication area because it's in such close proximity, that you would prefer to have the buffer zone back? That was a point that we touched upon at a prior meeting, and I'm just seeking clarification as to what the commission's preference to something like that would be.
And I don't think I can really speak on that because I'd like to know what BSC's stormwater review has to say about that. My concern is looking at that pond and that parking in that building right up against, that's a major issue for me.
is this pond. So that's.
I mean, you know, right now, currently, because I don't know anything about the stormwater. I mean, I don't know that much about stormwater. That's why he's doing a peer review, or his company is.
Sure.
So, and at the last meeting, when I zoomed in, I really couldn't hear much of anything. So this is all coming firsthand for me right now.
We didn't talk about stormwater last
Okay.
meeting. You didn't miss anything. Because
Okay.
we're still waiting for Dom. No offense.
Okay, but no, but I'm saying as far as your stormwater and having it right up against and your replication, I mean, Matthew can attest, trying to zoom in and listen to what was being said was next to impossible.
It was difficult.
It
sure.
was really
Yes.
difficult. You've zoomed in, you know. So, anyway,
I think it's a safe bet to anticipate Dom not finding
okay,
problems with the stormwater because it was peer reviewed by Tetra Tech.
okay,
So I think to Phil's point, you know, reputable firm and no reason to anticipate finding something egregious. And I think that's what Dom's looking for.
okay.
So, but that, again, is not kind of the crux of your problem. You know, those two things complement each other. The stormwater handbook and the Wetlands Protection Act regulations go hand in glove. They don't stand in for one another.
Right, and to Matthew's point, to echo that, that was our position and our response, is those are integrated together. The Wetlands Protection Act and the stormwater standards are essentially one and the same. And they're written that if we meet all of those stormwater protections, it can address a number of the initial concerns that were raised during Matthew's first peer review. The second parts of their comments that stormwater doesn't address is habitat, for example. And our wetland consultant provided her professional opinion that habitat wasn't something that was really applicable here in her professional opinion in terms of what she has seen from the site, the wetland characteristics, et cetera. So there was no need for replacement. That was Nicole from Goddard Consulting during the first couple of meetings with us.
If I may, I took issue with Nicole's analysis and sort of went through that in the second comment letter. The Wetlands Protection Act protects the wildlife habitat as a statutory interest, not only for rare species and certified vernal pools, but for all wildlife. The wildlife habitat values of BVW are recognized as the most significant BVW is recognized as the most significant wetland for wildlife in Massachusetts. So the concern is that alteration within the buffer zone will result in a change of pre-existing drainage characteristics, flushing characteristics, salinity, distribution, sediment patterns, flow patterns, potentially lowering of the water level within the BVW, the water table, destruction of vegetation within the BVW, the changing of water temperature, biological oxygen demand, and other physical, biological, and chemical characteristics of the receiving water. So those are the things we know that significant alteration of buffer zones result in the adjacent wetland. So those are direct alterations of the BVW that would be expected from significant work in the buffer zone that have an adverse effect on the wildlife habitat interests of the Wetlands Protection Act. So that's where the concern lies. And stormwater management doesn't deal with that as recognized. So it does sit out there as a statutory interest of the Act that is expected to be altered with significant work in a buffer zone that proper stormwater management doesn't address. So that is a concern that I think goes unaddressed.
Yeah.
So I would weigh in on that as a response, which was part of Nicole's initial response. Stormwater doesn't address wildlife habitat. Yes, I agree. So she provided in the first response package to the commission and to Matthew, the simplified wildlife habitat evaluation, which had all of the various standards and checklists that, one would need to go down and say what is applicable here. because that's part of the determination as to habitat protection that would be necessary. And in short stroke summary, without going down each one unless the commission wants me to, there was none. So there was nothing in the evaluation that she needed to go through that would trigger any further concern that there was a habitat in jeopardy for the buffer zone work that was adjacent to the resource area. And that's what we're providing in terms of documentation. So that's in the record, obviously.
If I may, though, work that affects BVW has no threshold that would trigger the performance of a wildlife habitat evaluation. And the work in the buffer zone that we've talked about and the resulting impacts to the BVW are the things that are protected by the Wetlands Protection Act. The changes to water temperature, BOD, physical, biological, chemical characteristics of the wetland are expected to be altered with the extent of work, and that's what buffer zones help protect the resource from those changes. And it is those characteristics of the wetland that provide the wildlife habitat functions that are the protected feature. So yes, we go through a wildlife habitat evaluation and we don't necessarily find sphagnum mats and basin depressions that might serve as vernal pools and 30-inch diameter trees and on down the checklist. But that's in this, when we're dealing with BVW, that's not something we need to demonstrate, because the BVW, the characteristics of the BVW are the thing that are significant to wildlife.
And that includes not just the BVW, but also the buffer surrounding the BVW?
The buffer protects those physical and biological characteristics of the BVW that are
Right.
significant to the
Right.
protection of wildlife
I get it,
habitat.
I get it. Yeah, I know Nicole probably did her checklist thing, and like you said, there were no certified vernal pools. However, we all know from the area, and we've been there, that there is a lot of wildlife. Ask any of the people who live in that area, and they will tell you there is lots of wildlife habitat. That they do. There's photographs that we were given of a great blue heron. I think it was there 2 years in a row. So, I mean, you know, does it meet Nicole's checklist? I don't know. But I just feel that what you just said as far as working in a buffer and how it's going to affect the resource areas and the temperature changes and everything that's going to affect the wildlife that does use it has shown that it's going to impact it negatively. Am I correct in saying that?
That is how we understand the science, yes.
Thank you. All right.
So why do people have the wildlife habitat? So what do they use that for?
Yeah, so wildlife habitat evaluations are established so that work that exceeds thresholds in resource areas that don't have a wildlife habitat presumption need to demonstrate that there won't be an adverse effect to wildlife when you get up over those impact thresholds. So,
Which we don't have any of those impact thresholds on this project, just
right,
as a
but
point of clarification.
BVW has no threshold. So no amount of impact is allowable without without permission. So the wildlife habitat evaluation, as an example, if you're dealing with bordering land subject to flooding, there's no presumption of importance to wildlife. If you're working over a threshold, over 5,000 square feet or 10%, then you have to perform a wildlife habitat evaluation to determine within that resource area, are there this checklist and anything on this checklist? And then the commission can make a decision about how to permit the work. So when you're dealing with potential impacts to BVW, there is no threshold that sort of kicks you into the wildlife habitat evaluation process. There's just, are there going to be impacts or are there not going to be impacts? And relying on the science, with work this close to your bordering vegetated wetland, you would anticipate that there would be impacts.
Yeah.
And so more buffer helps protect the functional value of the wetland. So looking for opportunities on the site to reduce the number of parking spaces,
Yeah.
you know, and pull in that footprint so that A, you can move away from the wetlands, and B, potentially have a smaller, a need for a smaller stormwater management system would be ideal. Is that a small parking garage in the northwest corner? Is that parking underneath the structure? Is that, you know, a waiver of the number of parking spaces that are required? It is immediately adjacent to the train station. I have no idea. Those are just things that a simple ecologist, you know, comes to my mind.
Right, and
But,
this is exactly what we're looking to you for, is like, I mean, these are the questions that I have, and you're just reiterating the same thing. I mean, except he puts it a little better than I do.
Well, if I may, let's talk about some of those, the ideas that were floated, because we talked about the balance, and Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, I think it, I mean, just to, it seems like this is the main area of concern, right? There's a pinch point here where we're really in the buffer zone. We can look at, we can't really change, as you can see, most of the site is pretty maxed out. The ZBA, which acted on behalf of the town, preferred to have a buffer for residential human beings, neighbors, over wildlife. That was a decision that the town made, right? They wanted to preserve.
Are you talking zoning, the zoning?
I'm talking about the zoning board,
The
yes.
zoning board made that
Correct.
decision?
Yep.
Okay.
Who acted on behalf as a comprehensive permit on the town, right?
Right.
So we're kind of maxed out. We can't really alter the site plan without going back and opening up
Well-
public meeting with the ZBA.
Myself personally, I looked at that plan and I said to myself as a resident, why do you need your own dog park when there's one just a block away across the street?
There is, there's one down here. So we
Yeah,
could look
so-
at,
So I'm like,
we could look
why
at pulling
can't-
this out and adding back some parking spaces here. We have to get it back. If we lose a couple, that would probably be considered a minor modification and we wouldn't have to open up the public hearing, which we could look to do that and potentially bring this out within 25 feet.
I mean, the way I'm looking at it is, it's needs versus wants. You know, I mean, everybody wants to have a beautiful building to sell and have beautiful apartments and have all these little amenities and have a beautiful courtyard and a beautiful pool and a beautiful dog park. I mean, some of those things to me versus needs. I mean, you know, 25% of that property is going to be for affordable housing because 40B, that's all it allows for now, and 40B was instituted 54 years ago. That needs to be upgraded probably to 33 1/3% because
Nothing to do with this, though.
I know it doesn't, but I'm just saying, they went 40B, so that brought me into that. So anyway, but I'm just saying, needs versus wants. Our job is to protect the resource areas. That's my number one thing. And when I see 80% of a buffer zone being taken away, you can't prove to me that that's not going to negatively impact that resource area. It's going to.
So would it be preferred if we can get this structure outside of the 25-foot, which it currently is in the 25-foot?
I'd like to see it a little further than 25 foot if possible.
I can tell,
I mean, I'd like to
visually, I
see.
know it's not gonna.
Let's see what you can come up with. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to commit to 25 feet because I don't really know what it's going to look like.
It's gonna be slightly further back. It's probably gonna be 20, just at about 25. It's not gonna be 50, it's not gonna be 35. We'll lose too much parking. And we're making a big investment, you know, in this, and the project has to work, right?
I understand that, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't. And I'm just trying to make you understand what our responsibility
Sure.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why we're here, and, you know, we appreciate the feedback, and we're trying to work with you on a plan that works for both sides, right? And I think we're at an impasse here where we're not gonna be able to provide the buffer that you're probably looking for. I think that's what we're kind of saying. We're trying to work to get it as significant as we can, but it's not gonna be a 35, 50-foot buffer. The project won't work.
Unless you change the way you design the buildings.
Unfortunately, we can't do that.
But
That's
no, I
something
mean, you
that's already
said you'd
been-
have to go back to zoning. It's not like it's impossible. It's just, it's doable.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something that we contractually have time or would be willing to go do.
Well, I mean, we could go ahead and deny it, and then you could go into DEP, and that'll take time too. So,
Well, that's why I think we're hoping to find a common ground.
Right.
yeah, and that's what we're hoping for too.
And we are as
but-
well. I mean, I know I am as well. But I mean, I understand and I've been following this project since it was first proposed. And I've watched the zoning board meetings and I saw how many meetings you people had and the negotiations that went on there. So what I'm asking for is for us to protect the areas that we're responsible for and are looking to you to come up with the solutions for that. Just like you negotiated with the zoning board.
Yeah, and I think this is where we can maybe look to replicate some of the parking here and get rid of the dog park and keep this, at a 25-foot buffer.
You know, maybe put a few parking spaces in front of the courtyard. I mean, I don't know what's possible.
We actually can't. We had that originally, we talked about that early on in this meeting, that we had parallel parking here, the fire chief shot that down right away. And so when it comes to life safety, we have to defer to.
And I understand that.
I think the best thing to do is see what you got, what we're looking for, and have your engineers go back and see what you guys can come up with. Otherwise, we're gonna sit here for another hour just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean, I'm not looking at,
All right.
the science, it's what can we all live with? And, we can pull this out. I think, Phil, correct me wrong, I mean, having a structure here, believe it or not, right, is actually better than surface water runoff, right? Because we'll have stormwater collection in these facilities versus, pavement runoff. But we can look at replicating the parking here and keeping this outside of the 25-foot buffer.
I think that would be the best.
Matthew, what are your thoughts?
Like to see it. You obviously, parking runoff would be collected and treated, so it wouldn't just run off into the wetland, but over a naturally but vegetated buffer, that might be preferable to roof drains.
Oh, didn't I just give you a brochure on something like that?
You did, actually.
I did.
Roof drain, yeah,
I think I did.
But
not my area, yeah.
I think to the chairman's point, you guys have good engineers and know what the commission's looking for.
Phil and Mark, I was just looking at something like that tonight.
So,
That's for you.
so moving the parking,
Yeah.
is there other things that you think could be done in other areas that could be improved?
I think you need to have a discussion about that proposed replication area and whether there's value in that or not. And that's something that we have kind of talked about. I think we've had that, that's been on the table at
We
least.
discussed it here a couple of meetings
Yeah.
ago, because you have expressed your concern about the buffer zone and the loss of it. So I want to make sure that I continually point out that we do have areas of replication that are directly resource area adjacent. So if this commission determines you would prefer to have the natural buffer, then that's what stays.
And those are for, essentially to accommodate the interests of the bylaw, because it's replicating local wetland that isn't state protected.
Right.
So that's a legitimate conversation to have and gains you some buffer around the wetland on the west.
Here,
Yeah,
here, and then here.
Yeah, right. So that's a good conversation to have and think about. I don't remember the condition of those wetlands, whether is full of invasives, but that's often a good thing to talk about. Getting some wetland improvement as a result of work that, so you might be able to think along those lines. Are there improvements to the existing wetlands that the project team could put on the table that benefits the resource. So there's an area that Nicole might be able to bring some thoughts to the table. Ways to improve those wetlands on site.
How large is that the courtyard area?
How large is it?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious.
Well, if you forgive me, I'll.
I don't have the plan in front of me yet, otherwise I'd try to figure it out myself, but,
And you accidentally stole mine.
sorry?
You accidentally stole mine.
Oh, sorry. It's because I'm sitting next to you.
I would say it's approximately 5,000 square feet. I'm just eyeballing it, somewhere in that neighborhood. Don't quote me. I can get you a real number, of course. But I guess if I can anticipate the likely question, elimination of the courtyard or the pool will not reduce the size of the building. So the
What-
building would be the fixed element at this point.
So, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
How far, like, not including the garage, how far is that building from the pond?
From the pond,
That's 18, 24, 18, 26.
We are 180 feet, plus minus.
Okay.
Sorry, how far is the building right now to that pond? I think you might just.
Yes, about 180 feet.
So it's 180 feet from the pond to that building.
But what about the building below?
This, the garage bay?
That would be
The garage
So it's
bay.
25 here, and it's probably
13.
13 at the closest point. So I think our goal would be to eliminate this, somehow try to keep this slope and keep it outside the 25 foot.
And I think, getting to what I think you were saying, and I
go
think
ahead.
getting to what you were saying, the courtyard, is there a reason, I mean, you're talking about how you absolutely need it. I get the pool. I personally am not a fan of apartments that have pools. We talked about that last time.
Right?
So I'm moving on. But a courtyard, what is the benefit of a courtyard?
The green space, the activity, the area.
It's-
There's kind of a lot of, hardscape around. It's nice to have some place to go, kind of hang out. There'll be grill, lawn games.
Sitting areas, gathering spaces. It's an amenity to be competitive in the industry. There are certain expectations on these projects, and that is certainly one of them.
But one of the things that everyone's talking about when we're talking about competitiveness is the fact that there's no housing. How difficult do you think it's going to be, considering everyone's talking about the lack of housing, to fill that building if you say didn't have a courtyard?
I think it would hurt, yeah.
I'm just
I think
saying
having a
that.
sea of parking
bring it.
here and having potentially that much more headlights in the units would hurt those units, I do. I don't think they would rent at the level they would rent at.
I guess
can't see it.
I'll be a little more direct and blunt.
This one I don't have.
What would you hope the goal to be if we eliminated the courtyard?
Moving the parking away from the pond, farther away, because you've got 180 feet.
Right.
Like, you could probably leave parking, so it's well outside a 100-foot buffer, of course, but even if you go to where you're, say, 50 feet from the pond, that could still give you the parking. I'm just thinking about what can you do to make that 25 feet. I'm not real, it still seems really close, but since you've got a lot of space there, you could move it into the courtyard.
I'll go on record in saying that is unlikely to occur in terms of putting the parking inside there, just to be candid with you. Certain program requirements for residents that would live here, dictate and demand that they have these elements, and embedding the parking in there, in my opinion, would be not advisable.
I find that odd because over in Weymouth, they have a lot of buildings around their train station sites, and I don't know as if they actually have courtyards and pools and everything. I've not physically been on their property, but just driving down Route 18. I mean, you've gone down 18. Do you see the giant apartment houses?
Yeah, I haven't. I've gone in there,
Yeah, I know
but,
that-
I mean, I don't think they have a courtyard.
The Commons at Southfield do the, Mio-
Yeah, that's
I mean,
inside Southfields. I'm talking about down the
Mio
route,
project does, the only one that doesn't is the Aeronaut, that was a small 130.
and the one across the street
Isn't-
from that.
That's an
Next to the
assisted
gas
living.
station.
Oh, okay, all right.
What's that?
Yeah, next to the gas station down, yeah.
Yeah, there's Commons at Southfield, there's Mio, and then the other one, Mass Light, I believe it's called, right there. They all have a pool, and they're all.
You know, I guess I'm just thinking that if for me, to have a courtyard is a lovely thought. I mean, you could probably incorporate that more around your pool area if you're gonna have places for people to grill and party and swim and entertain versus, you know, a green space. I'd rather see a green space be a BVW. I mean, not a buffer zone to a BVW. You know, that would make me very happy, especially where you've got Island Grove just a couple of blocks away from where this giant complex is gonna be. I mean, it's in walking distance. You cross over Route 123 and there's Island Grove Park, which is a wonderful place for, it's swimming, it's got picnic areas, it's got a snack shack, it's fishing if the kids wanna go fishing. It's within walking distance. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think also too, the ZBA, I mean, they wanted all this to be green space.
And
right?
that would be lovely to be green
Which
space,
could
and
mark it.
I understand
So
that.
they want the green space, it would impact the impervious coverage, that would be something we'd have to go back to the ZBA, and as Phil mentioned, it's a very high likely that we're not gonna put parking there.
Okay.
So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chair and members of the board, I mean, we're gonna look at trying to get this out as much as possible. I don't know if this is the decision that, if you wanna wait for another member, if you wanna decide what your thoughts are on the replication versus leaving the natural buffer, that's kind of a yes or no answer. If you guys have any thoughts on that tonight or not.
We don't have a veterans, I mean, we don't have a conservation agent, but we are using our peer reviewer, so I would want to know what his input is on this, because to me, you're acting like our conservation.
No, they can't move that building
No,
anywhere
I-
else on the property, can they?
I'm not saying they, yeah, no, I know. But that's why we were kind of wondering about the courtyard, why couldn't that be a parking area?
Yeah, I mean, most of the building is outside of the buffer zone, I
Yeah,
believe, so.
yeah. Because you're going to fill that ILSF,
It is not an ILSF.
Sorry, IVW.
IVW, sorry.
Yeah.
Isolated vegetative wetland, I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah, I would probably, given constraints of the site and what we're hearing, I would probably be inclined to say that the benefits of getting some buffer outweigh the benefit that replication would achieve. Combine that with something that, Nicole might put together by way of restoration within the wetland for habitat improvements and so forth. That might be reasonable. Seeing what can be done with that garage.
Yeah, we're absolutely gonna look at this,
Yeah.
filling this to a minimum of 25,
Yeah.
the best we can.
I hate to say it, but, if pool is probably considered impervious, right?
Yes.
If the pool weren't there, does the size of the stormwater structures diminish?
Technically, yes, but not in a real way that moves the needle, as you can imagine, to the scale of the rest of the development.
That might be an interesting thing just as an academic exercise. If the pool weren't there, what's the resulting size of the stormwater basins? Does that allow them to be pulled further back from the wetland on the west side of the property?
So I'll interject, of course. I think we've tried to establish the pool is an integral component to the plan. So while we could perform that exercise, if you'd like to know it informationally, happy to do it. But the likelihood that the pool gets eliminated is zero. I would say
So the
near
building is
zero.
the way it is, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Yes.
that puts you in a spot.
It does.
So I think, see what, based on the conversation, sort of the nibbling around the edges that we've talked about tonight, see what comes in and then make a decision if it's permittable or not permittable.
We nibble it on the edges.
Sometimes that's what you have to
We're
do.
gonna have to do.
We did. But again, I would like to work together on this project and see some changes, but to what we've just discussed, I would like to see what you can come up with, and then we'll take it from there and see what happens.
So just as an engineer, I always like to leave with an agenda. And let me recap. So we believe would have the stormwater review from your consultant by Friday, which will allow hopefully time for us to review it, comment. We'll come back and see you at the next meeting. You're going to defer the discussion on replication versus buffer zone. Your consultant has weighed in that, in his opinion, the buffer zone would be more important
Yeah.
to the function. Is that a decision, or is that up for discussion?
I agree with him. Replication is touchy. It doesn't always work. I would prefer to leave what's actually there because it's successful. Would you agree?
I do agree.
That's better?
I do agree with that,
Yeah.
only because we know the failure rate.
And then we will review the layout opportunities for Garage C to
Yeah.
increase that buffer to the pond.
Stretch it, stretch it, stretch it.
You want it longer? Is that what you're asking?
Stretch the buffer.
Oh,
If you-
the
if you-
buffer,
If you've
silly
watched
me,
all
I
the-
thought you wanted a bigger garage.
No,
Okay,
stretch
I'm
the
kidding.
Meetings, Gene, you know that their engineers have been very creative throughout the
I
process.
have watched the zoning and I've watched that building change a lot.
We were ahead of the planning board too back in 2018. This has
I
been
remember,
5 years in the
trust
making.
me, I remember before it was a 40B, so yeah, I do know.
We're just trying to provide the much needed
Right.
housing state.
But I mean, we saw the negotiations back and forth with everybody else, and now you're
Not
here
all
with
of them.
us. Sorry?
Not all of them.
Most of them. No, everything.
Law, lawyers.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a lengthy process.
It truly is.
Okay, so with that in mind, we would request a continuance to your next meeting, that we will review the information. We will make the appropriate change relative to replication, and we'll look forward to your consultant's review. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Tony, do we know when the next meeting is?
It's going to be the 14th of November.
November, is there availability on that date?
Yep.
So by the 14th, assuming we get the stormwater letter,
Oh, you will. I mean, you said it's going to be done by Friday. and
That's
you're
what
just
I
gonna send it
heard.
right to the,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so it'll go to Tony and then,
and so
yeah.
we will have time well ahead of the 14th to opine on that, should there be any back and forth, and we'll make sure that correspondence runs through Tony and the chair and to all the members there. And well ahead of that meeting, we can submit to Tony,
Through, Tony.
through Tony,
Whatever you guys can,
so that the board will have time to review that. Because our expectation is that unless there's any outstanding issues with stormwater, we're going to present what we think is the best case option, and on the 14th, we're going to ask that a vote be taken.
Sure.
and Phil, can you CC, obviously, Matthew, myself on all the correspondence?
And everything. You got it.
And Matt, is there anything else that you would add for them to try to do beyond what Phil just stated?
Oh, we talked about potential improvements within the
Existing.
wetlands.
Wetlands.
Yeah, yeah.
If there's invasive species.
Invasive management.
What if there isn't? Then it's fine, or?
We can plant some if you'd like.
That's funny.
It doesn't need your help.
I mean, I remember.
We have plenty of
poison ivy.
wildlife that does that for us.
Oh, God, I know. I remember there's plenty of multiflora in there.
Yeah.
So there's at least something to go after. there's always something to go after.
I thought I saw poison ivy and stuff.
There is poison ivy in there. I wouldn't go in there.
Unfortunately, that's a native.
It is.
Native everywhere.
Not desirable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think that understanding, what the applicant is saying about their, drawing a hard line, then I think that what we've talked about tonight kind of gets at the opportunity for improvements for the wetlands concerns.
Yeah, and I don't want to use the term hard line. I mean, we're trying to do as much as we can, right? We are limited to what we can do, right? In a perfect world, this would be as simple as just moving it out and making everyone happy, right? So I don't want to use the word hard line. It's more we're hamstrung by the limitations of the site and still making a financeable project.
No, Karen.
We say the same thing with every applicant now, because
Yep.
there are no easy properties that come before us.
Yeah,
Right.
of course, yeah.
Anybody else on the board have anything before we open up to the public? Nothing from the public, bring it back to the board. Kathy, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I think Jean and Lynn did a good job. And thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
All right, somebody want to make a motion to continue to the November 14th?
Anything else?
I'll make a motion to continue SE 084-563, notice of intent to November 14th meeting.
I'll
Do we have a
second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, and so the building permit that I was discussing earlier was for 207 Bedford Street, it's a demolition, there's no wetland impact over there, so be approved tomorrow. With that
What was
being
that?
said-
Sorry.
207 Bedford Street, building
Yeah.
permit.
Okay.
You smell
Yeah.
like juicy fruit. Reminds me of high school.
Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, have a good night.
Thanks, Kathy.